Hello everyone and welcome to Cine 103 History of Motion Pictures to 1945. We are up to Class 13 and one of my favorite topics, film noir. Our film that we're going to start with though is not quite film noir. It kind of is and kind of isn't. It's kind of on the borderline. And that's why I like to start with it because it seems to have all of the elements of film noir, but a lot of people say it's not quite. It's more a romance than film noir. We don't really have a femme fatale, and so it's not really crime, but it kind of is. So it is one of those borderline films, and that's why we're going to start with it. You can decide if you want it to be film noir or not. Casablanca, 1942, one of the most beloved films in American history. And it has stood the test of time quite well. We can contrast that with Gone with the Wind from just a couple years before that, which has not quite stood the test of time quite so well. Of course, it took on a rather tough topic of the Civil War and slavery and all that. Here we have World War II. Definitely good guys and bad guys. It's kind of easy to pick sides. We don't really have a great deal of moral ambiguity in this film. It's pretty clear who the bad guys are, and that would be the Nazis. And we have one of our great all-time Hollywood stars, Humphrey Bogart, in the lead. And he's right up there with Clark Gable and Greta Garbo and Jean Harlow and Jimmy Stewart and Cary Grant. He's one of the all-time top Hollywood movie stars. And this might be your first time getting to know Humphrey Bogart. And lucky you, because you have a lot to dive into and a lot to discover. So he began earlier in the 1930s in a lot of gangster movies. And he used to joke that he would get bumped off by Jimmy Cagney in most every film because he was never the lead. At Warner Brothers, Cagney was the lead, and there were other people that were the lead. He was one of the top characters in the movies, but he wasn't the lead that Jimmy Cagney was, and he was having a little bit of a hard time breaking out of all that into leading man status. He got lucky and made a couple of non-gangster films. Before this one, and we're going to cover it today a little later on, is The Maltese Falcon, and that probably is his breakout role where he's playing a detective. He's not playing a detective here, but this one just pairs up quite nicely with The Maltese Falcon, and it really ensures his leading man status. These two films together, one right after the, not quite one right after the other, but it really cemented him in as a leading man. And this is the first romantic lead for Bogart. There is a woman in Maltese Falcon, and she's kind of a femme fatale, but it's not really a romance. And here, this one, it's very definitely probably more romance than anything else. There's a love triangle. I don't want to give, well, I'll probably end up giving quite a bit of it away. So anyway, a bit of a love triangle, and like I say, more of a romance than noir. Let's talk a little bit about the setting of the film. It is in Casablanca, as the name says, in Morocco. And Morocco, if you're a little fuzzy on your geography, it's in North Africa. It's up there on the Atlantic coast. It's not quite on the Mediterranean, but it's way North Africa where the desert is and all of that. And at the time of this film, when it's set, which is set almost exactly in the present day, which is 1941. And it went into production the week after the bombing at Pearl Harbor. So the filmmakers knew that the United States was going to enter the war, but of course in 1942, nobody knew how the war was going to turn out. we could have lost the war and they could have banned this film. The Nazi overlords could have banned this film and all the whole rest of it. Nobody really knew how it was going to turn out. And it was really the perfect film at the perfect time, though, because there was very super patriotism. We were really ready to get into the war. We hadn't really lost any battles or anything like that yet, and we wouldn't even try to land on Fortress Europe until 1944. So this movie came, if it had come out 6 months earlier, then it probably would have come and gone without making much noise at all. And it's hard to believe today, but back in 1939 and 1940 and 1941, there were a lot of Americans. Matter of fact, most Americans were thinking that they didn't want anything to do with the war. President Roosevelt actually ran for his third term in 1940, saying that he wouldn't put American boys, shed American blood in Europe. And he ran pretty much saying that he was going to keep us out of the war. Now, we had already been off to Europe just couple years before that, 22, 23 years before that, for World War I. And that was an awful war, people dying in trenches in the mud, and it was just really awful. And it seemed quite senseless to a lot of people, because the main people involved in World War I, what they used to call the Great War until World War II came along, World War I, they were cousins. Queen Victoria of England and her nieces and nephews and so on were the Kaiser in Germany and the Tsar in Russia. And by the way, Kaiser and Tsar all come from the root Caesar, from Julius Caesar. And so does Shah, by the way, the Shah that they had in Iran. So anyway, these cousins are, for the most part, fighting a war, and it was pretty much a draw. The Americans came in and helped to give the victory to the French and the British, but Germany never really conquered France. They never got into Paris or anything like that. And a lot of people thought it was a big waste of human life. And so now it's a few years later. Hitler is in power since the 1930s. The Japanese are making lots of trouble in the Pacific. They have invaded Korea. They have invaded China, and they are being very, very militaristic. And Americans are thinking, we can stay out of this mess. We have a big, giant Pacific Ocean on one side and a big, giant Atlantic Ocean on the other side, and that will protect us. And of course, little did they know that the world was getting smaller and smaller by the day. And there was, like I say, a lot of isolationism, and they're going to refer to isolationism in this film. It's very interesting in that way. So in 1941, our character Rick, he is going to kind of represent America in this situation. He wants to be an isolationist too, at least until the end of the movie. So he represents the very ambiguity. He is going to say, I wonder what's going on in America. I bet they're asleep all across America. Now, he's not specifically speaking of war. He's thinking maybe of time zones and things like that. But the writers of the film put that in very, very specifically to have sort of a double meaning. At another point in the movie, he says, I stick my neck out for no one. And that is kind of what America is saying, metaphorically speaking. That's kind of what America is saying. So the whole idea with French Vichy government is controlled by French collaborators. So when the Nazis came into France, they rolled into Paris. The French gave up and surrendered. And when there is a war, and the United States knows this a little bit from our time in the Middle East, the military people don't really run a country. That is what you need politicians for, and it's also what you need policemen for, and mayors, and all the whole rest of it. Winning a war is a different thing than controlling a country, occupying a country, and all of that. So after Germany got in to France, they needed to be able to run the country, right? Somebody's got to run City Hall, and you still have to collect taxes and keep all that stuff going. And sadly, there were plenty of French who were happy to collaborate. They were happy to help out. And some French, not the majority, but there were French saying, yes, we don't like Jews either. And by the way, that couple down the street, they're Jewish, and so on, right? So they were collaborating with the Nazis. They were plenty happy to be part of that whole government. So they were running the lower half of France, south of Paris, and all of that. And their headquarters was in the town of Vichy. So Vichy, France, or the Vichy government, they were the ones that were collaborating with the Nazis. Now, there was also the resistance, right? If you're up on your sci-fi and your Star Wars and all that kind of stuff with collaborators and resistance and all of that, the resistance would be cutting phone lines. They would be destroying train tracks and things like that, just to slow the Germans down. So France had some colonies in North Africa, and Morocco was one of the colonies. And so the Vichy government is running Casablanca in North Africa. So that's why at the beginning of the movie, the French are the bad guys. Normally we think of the French as allies for us, but these are Vichy French. They're collaborating with the Nazis, and when we see in the movie the Nazis come in, the military chief there, he welcomes them in and gives them the best table in the restaurant and all that sort of thing. So it might seem a little confusing. What's going on? Why are the French and the Germans? That's because that was the collaborators from the Vichy government. So we're going to meet a couple of wonderful character actors in this film, and I told you, I think earlier, that we were going to meet a couple of these character actors because to me they are the spice of Hollywood movies. It's like if you're cooking a meal, if you just have a good chicken or good beef or something like that, you got to spice it up. You need your salt and your pepper and your oregano and your garlic and all that kind of stuff, right? You need all the peppers and everything. You got to spice it up, and that's the way I think of our character actors. We had our wonderful Scream Queen, and we had our wonderful butler, Eric Bloor, and here we have Peter Lorre, and that's him on the right. He's wonderful. He plays these sort of underhanded, greasy sort of. He's not really not often a bad guy killer. He has played bad guys and killers, but mostly he's just not a trustworthy. Usually breaking the law somehow, but not in a major way. Every once in a while he might play some sort of a hero, but mostly he's really a great character actor. At being, especially in film noir, and we'll meet him again in Maltese Falcon. But that's his character. He's a little guy, and his eyes kind of seem to bug out a little bit, and just a really wonderful actor. He was still acting into the 1960s and 1970s. He was doing some wonderful Hammer horror movies and things like that as late as the 1960s. But he came over to the United States from Europe when Hitler came in. I don't think he's Jewish, but he might be the one that has the Jewish wife, but a lot of smart people just got out of Europe when Hitler and the Nazis came in, and he was lucky to get out. He didn't speak English. He had to learn it. Lots of actors and actresses and writers and directors came over. We got, for exactly the wrong reasons, but we got some wonderful talent in Hollywood in the 1940s because of Hitler and the Nazis and so on. And so they had to, like I say, if you're going to be in theater, you're going to have to learn English. If you have to speak it or write it, if you're a writer, or be able to direct in it. And there were a number of just top-notch Hollywood people that escaped Germany or Austria and Europe in general. And also Sidney Greenstreet down here, and we're going to see him again also in Maltese Falcon, and he's a wonderful actor as well. So many refugee Jews play German Nazis in the film. Now that is gotta be tough. That's gotta be tough. Wow, you know the Nazis are putting your relatives in concentration camps and things like that, and so some of them to get hired, right? You're an actor, you need to work for a living and so on. It's not any of these people right here, but the head Nazi he was Jewish, and we saw him way earlier as the somnambulist in The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari when he was much younger, probably in his 20s. So here he is playing, not in this picture, but here he is 25 years later playing a Nazi, and round them all up and all that sort of thing. And wow, that has got to be tough. Just think about it. It's really got to be tough. So this film had trouble with the Hays Code. There's implications of sexual of sex for favors in one scene. This is Renault here. He's the French he's the French collaborator, and it's implied that he's giving special favors to pretty young girls for sex. And then also Rick and Ilsa, they had a romantic time in Paris, and she was married to him. Okay, she was married to him. She thought he was dead, and so in her mind she was a widow, but she wasn't. And the Hays office had some trouble with that. It's they're staying in the same hotel and that sort of thing. So they were reading between the lines, and they had some trouble with the film. And a number of the films that we're going to talk about today in film noir really skirted the boundaries of the Hays office, also known as the production code. So we'll make note of that. So they were together. They had the wonderful love affair. She was married to the heroic resistance fighter. So he is really the true hero in the movie. He's been fighting in the resistance the whole part. Rick has been saying, "I don't stick my neck out," and so on. And he is going whichever way the wind is blowing. When it looks like the Americans are going to come out on, by the end of the movie, actually, he decides he's had enough with this whole collaboration thing. So he's not totally a bad guy, not the way the Nazis are in the movie. But he, kind of blows with the wind. So the film won 3 Oscars, screenplay and picture and director. And it's amazing that it won the screenplay Oscar because they were still writing the end of the movie, or the final scene of the movie. And I've linked to it. It's a wonderful scene. The night before they shot it. really under the gun. Think about the next time you have a paper or an assignment due and you wait to the last minute to do it. And we're only human. And these guys that wrote the film, they were trying to figure out how are we going to get out of this jam. So I've linked to Peter Lorre and the Letters of Transit, and it's sort of a made-up thing. There's sort of a magical, mystical letter that you can go, and the Nazis have to let you go wherever you want to go if you have one of these Letters of Transit. It's not a real thing, but in the movie they needed this plot device, and Peter Lorre is playing Ugarte. He could play foreigners. We don't know if he's Turkish. We don't know if he's Greek. We don't know if he's Austrian or whatever, but that's kind of what he did in the movies, is he would play these underhanded type people. We're also going to see Sam, the piano player, and he is Rick's right-hand man and goes with him wherever he is. And Ilsa is going to ask Sam to play their song, right? Their song. As time goes by. You must remember this: a kiss is still a kiss. The fundamental rules apply as time goes by. A wonderful song. And even today, when Warner Brothers on DVDs and things like that, when their logo comes up, they play a couple of bars from that song. So still, that's sort of the Warner Brothers theme song when you get right down to it. So Rick is, she's going to walk back into his life. He was heartbroken. He left Paris, somehow ends up here in North Africa, in Morocco. He's got Rick's Cafe American, and everybody is sort of treated equally, whether they're Germans or French or whatever. He won't let the collaborators and so on into the exclusive upstairs gambling room, but otherwise it's kind of a neutral place, kind of a Switzerland there in North Africa. And Ilsa walks in with her husband, and Rick, or Bogart, is going to keep it together for a little while, but when the place closes down, he's going to really break down and think about their love affair and of all the gin joints and all the bars and all the world, and she walks into mine. And this movie has so many great classic lines. The troubles of two people in this crazy world don't amount to a hill of beans. Round up the usual suspects. We'll always have Paris. It just has so many classic lines. And I saw somewhere there was one of those all-time great lines in Hollywood history, and you get, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn, and Toto, I have a feeling we're not in Kansas. All those great lines from all these great movies. I'm ready for my close-up, Mr. DeMille. All these wonderful, great lines. And, of course, the film that had the most lines out of the top 100 quotable Hollywood movies was, yeah, you guessed it, Casablanca. The ending too, and about the ending, they kind of had written themselves into a jam, because Bogart is the movie star. Bogart's the movie star, and the star and the hero always gets the girl in, not that it's ever her choice, of course, but the hero gets the girl in the end. They always live happily ever after. And here she is married to the heroic resistance fighter. So how can he take her away from the heroic resistance fighter? Do they kill off the heroic resistance fighter? Well, that kind of sends a bad message, right? That heroes die, and they didn't really want to have to kill. They didn't really want to have to kill him off. The Hayes office certainly wasn't going to let her leave him and go off with Bogart and commit adultery. So they had really written themselves into quite a trap there, and it's really a wonderful way that they get out of that. And I've linked to that scene so you can watch it for yourself. It's a wonderful scene, and This film has held up very, very well over the years. I think you'll enjoy it. Yes, it's in black and white, but I think you'll enjoy it. It's a good movie to watch with the whole family. I'm sure your parents, if you're lucky enough to have your grandparents around, what a great movie to watch with the whole family. So right now, what you should do is stop this part of the class, the lecture narration, go watch all that Casablanca stuff. I've got maybe 5 or 6 links, and then come back, and then we're going to get into film noir. Okay, so film noir, French for dark cinema, and you might have noticed that there are lots of French words floating through our class. We're going to get another one here coming up, femme fatale, they were right there at the very beginning of movies with the Americans. They worked on projectors and things like that, and sort of co-founders of cinema along with the Americans. They were right there from the very beginning. They have a very strong and vibrant film industry. Not the big blockbusters that America makes, but the French have been there all along. So there are, like I say, there are a number of terms, not just film noir and femme fatale and mise en scène and genre and on and on. So film noir, based on books and a series of books called série noire in French. And so when they started making movies out of these novels, somebody said, well, this would be film noir, because the other one were série noire, and the peak really was the 40s, especially after the war, but even going back to Maltese Falcon from 1941 and through to almost the end of the 1950s, when television really takes foothold. Now, I don't know why it's sort of TV, because TV's TV and movies are movies, but that was the peak of the film noir era. There are still film noir movies today, lots of really good ones, but now today they would call them neo-noir or new noir. And movies like the Sin City movies, even from the graphic novels, Chinatown, a classic film. So there are still film noir, but kind of neo-noir. And I'll tell you, there are so many television shows that do a dream sequence or something like that. Somebody gets bonked on the head and they dream of trench coats and fedoras and black and white. And it's really a trope in television. Just about not every, but so many television series have done their homage to, and that's a French word too, or homage to film noir. And the women get to do wonderful stuff with their hair and the wonderful slinky dresses, and the men with their trench coats and fedoras, and probably not smoking cigarettes. We kind of don't do that so much anymore. But I'll tell you, they really need to work on a non-lethal cigarette, because they look so cool in movies. While they're trying to cause cancer to our lungs and everything, visually, cigarettes are really cool. And the filmmakers knew that back in the 1940s, and even all the way up into Blade Runner. Cigarettes just look nice. As soon as they can come up with a non-lethal cigarette that they can start putting back into the movies again, I'm sure somebody will decide that that has to happen. We get wonderful tropes in film noir, moral ambiguity. The good guys aren't all that good. The bad guys are, pretty bad. We get deceit. Often there is voiceover, which means that if it's based on a book, then the book was written in the first person. So if there's a book with a detective saying, the dame walked into my office and she was gorgeous and check out those gams, then in a movie that would be done as voiceover rather than the first person. So we get femme fatales, and yeah, the women are bad, but if you're an actress, that's a great part to play. You don't want to be the bad guys all the time, right? We have minorities, whether Hispanics or whether Middle Eastern, types that are practically nothing but bad guys, and that can get a little tiring. Really, you want a few heroes, but for women who have had all sorts of wonderful roles and things like that over the years, it's much better to be the villain than screaming and needing to be rescued from the monster or something like that. So a lot of people really like playing villains. It's good meaty roles, lots of acting and all that. So finally, women have this major role to play, and a lot of times they are the smart ones. They're miles ahead of the guys. Sometimes the guys aren't all that bright in film noir, and they are just thinking, how can I get this gorgeous dame into the sack? Basically, that's what they're thinking when they meet the woman, the femme fatale. And she is a mile ahead of the poor dumb guy, thinking, I've got a rich husband, he's old, he's mean, whatever, and I want all his money, basically. It's very primal, very primal. And here comes this big dumb guy that wants to do right, and the femme fatale will plant the seed, right? She'll plant the seed, water it, and she'll say, yes, yes, you know, you're great too. I'd love to be with you, but my husband. And that's all she'll say. And then the guy is the one that says, maybe he could have an accident, or maybe we need to bump him off. It's never her idea. She plants the seed. And the guy, because guys aren't talkers, we're doers, right? Guys are doers. We're not just going to talk about our problems. We're going to do something about it. Okay. And so the femme fatale, she's so much smarter than the guy, going to plant that seed and water it a little bit, and then it's going to be his idea. So crime, but not gangsters, right? These are not really gangster movies. This is not Scarface. This is not Public Enemy. It's not The Godfather. It's not Goodfellas. It's not that. It's crime of a different sort. And usually the protagonist isn't a police officer or anything like that. Maybe a detective, or maybe just an ordinary guy who gets caught up with this femme fatale. So many of these movies are B movies, low budget, and they would be part of a double bill. I think we've talked about this, but in quick review, there were a lot of double features, especially during the Depression, where people could get 2 movies for the price of 1. And the A movie was the first movie with the big movie stars and the big budget and the big studio and all that. And then the second half of that double feature would be the B movie. And over a short period of time, the B movie took on a meaning of its own. So in the 1950s, they kind of become drive-in movies, and the studios would dump some of their low-budget movies into the drive-ins in the summer. Teenagers going to see the movies, maybe not even watching the movie, maybe in the back seat making out, who knows what. Not a great time for the movies. The studios thought that their important movies and their award-worthy movies would be in the fall, inside in a nice darkened theater and all that. So over a bit of time in the 50s and 60s, some of these low-budget type movies, and especially in the 1950s, there are a lot of sci-fi movies, sci-fi monsters and things like that, Invasion of the Body Snatchers and Invaders from Mars and wonderful movies like that are going to be dumped into the drive-in for teenagers. Now, teenagers today have it much better because they're making the big budget movies for teenagers and young people. The Marvel movies and DC movies and Harry Potter movies and all that are made for a very young audience. But back then, the cheesy, cheapo type movies were made for young people. Okay, so film noir, not always, and we're going to talk about a couple that were definitely not B movies, but it's kind of like going to a flea market or a garage sale. You might find a real gem buried in all the junk. And so that's kind of the way B movies are. Yeah, sure, there's a lot of real crappy stuff, but there are so many beautiful gems in there. And I've linked to a wonderful documentary. It's the entire hour and 20-minute documentary. Of course, you don't have to watch the whole thing. I would show in class about the first 9 or 10 minutes or so. And if you like it, fantastic. You can watch the whole documentary. It's called Film Noir, Bringing Darkness to Light. But if you don't want to watch the whole documentary, then I would say the first 9 or 10 minutes is good enough, and you'll learn quite a bit. Partly that film noir is kind of hard to put a handle on. They're not gangster movies. They're not this. They're not that. How can you tell a film noir? And I know a lot of students, and as soon as they see a gun and it's black and white, they're kind of thinking noir. And you just kind of have to be careful. It's not as easy to pick a film noir the way a musical or a western or something like that is. They're a little harder to pin down. Okay, so let's meet a couple more wonderful films here. Double Indemnity, not a B movie. This is from Billy Wilder, and he is one of those Europeans who got out of Europe, got out of Hitler's Nazi empire there, Reich, and got to America, learned English, directed some fantastic movies. And in the 104 class, we would be talking about Sunset Boulevard, and we would also be talking about Some Like It Hot with Marilyn Monroe. So wonderful director, Billy Wilder. This film here has first-person voiceover. It's based on a book by a wonderful author. So many of his books were made into noir movies. James M. Cain. He also did The Postman Always Rings Twice. We have a very short scene linked to The Postman Always Rings Twice. This one, the movie starts off and he's going through the streets in his car, running red lights and all that, and goes up to his office and goes up the elevator and into his office, and a early recording device, sort of a dictation machine, and he basically is going to tell the story of how he got shot. Now, it's a little hard to see. He's got it's not exactly a stain right there on his, near his shoulder there, but he's been shot, basically. And he is going to tell us the story, so that means it's going to be in the first person, of how he lost the dame and lost the money and committed murder and so on. And this is known as a framing device because we're going to set up kind of a question. Okay, how did he get shot and how did this all happen? Okay, and so now we're going to have to go back into the movie to find out. So it kind of starts off not quite in the middle of the action, actually kind of toward the end of the action, but instead of slowly leading in and having him at work and then going out on a call and meeting the woman, we kind of start off in a very exciting way. Car racing through the streets, this guy's been shot, and so on. And we're going to have to get to the end of the movie to find out how all this came down. And Billy Wilder did that again in Sunset Boulevard, and there are so many other movies with framing devices, from Forrest Gump to Fight Club to Saving Private Ryan. Okay, all those movies have framing devices. They're going to set up this question that needs to be solved or answered. And boy, such wonderful dialogue. How could I know that lilacs could sometimes smell like murder? And I don't think I have that right. I'm sorry, but sunflower smells like murder. There's a great line that's not in this movie that says, "The city was dark with more than just night." I love that line. And in this film, he's an insurance salesman, and he's stopping in at the house. He wants to speak to her husband about renewing the policy on their cars, and they're going to have this wonderful conversation, and they're kind of talking about cars, but they're kind of talking about sex. How fast was I going, officer? And I'm going to have to give you a ticket and things like that. And later on, there's another film with Humphrey Bogart, and they're talking about horses and racing and how would you ride in the saddle. This wonderful dialogue. And of course, they're not talking about horses or cars. They're talking about sex. But that's what they had to do in the movies during the production code. Some people say that the movies were better because of all these restrictions. They had to be more creative and smarter when they wanted to talk about this stuff. So there we have Phyllis, and we have our big dumb guy, and yeah, she's got a rich husband, and she's going to plant all the seeds. Boy, is she a great femme fatale, and he's going to fall for it, hook, line, and sinker. He's an insurance salesman. He's not a bad guy until he meets her. Really, he's just a regular old normal kind of a guy. This is actually also based on a real story that happened in the 1930s, I think it was, and a woman and a man committed murder to get the insurance policy off of her husband. And double indemnity means that the policy pays off double if the guy is killed at work. And her husband is going to be taking the train to a work-related something or other when they kill him. And so they are going to get double indemnity on that policy that he's got. There's a scene this scene right here, actually, and they're just starting off their conversation. He's already thinking to himself, and we know his thoughts because we have his voiceover, and that's really kind of important. We are in his head, right? We know what he's thinking. I'd like to get a better look at her without that silly staircase in the way. And she's going to say, you sell auto insurance or other kinds of insurance? And he's going to say, yeah, we sell, homeowner and this and that and the other. And she says, accident insurance? And he says, accident insurance? Sure. And everybody has to think, why is she asking about accident insurance? Okay, and if we were in the classroom, that's when I would usually shout out, run, okay, get away from her. Why would anybody be asking about accident insurance? Okay, but this guy, he's not smart enough to figure that out. All right, so we have another film from the closer to the present era, certainly after the production code, and this is Body Heat. It has the same loose plot. There's insurance and things like that, and a rich husband and so on. Only now that it's the 1980s, not only is it in color, but it can be R-rated. There is a wonderful scene of double entendre when they're first meeting, and she makes quite an impression. They're just at an outdoor musical concert in the summer. It's very, very hot. Everybody's fanning themselves at this outdoor concert. It takes place in Florida, and there is a lot of sweating going on in this movie. It's almost comical. I thought they had air conditioning in Florida by the 1980s, but by the looks of this movie, maybe not. So it's set in the 1980s, but it really feels like the 1940s. Kathleen Turner, William Hurt. Wonderful film. You can watch it for extra credit. Like I say, they can do R-rated stuff by the 1980s that they couldn't do in the in Double Indemnity in the earlier movies. Okay, so back to Humphrey Bogart. This is the Maltese Falcon, a little bit earlier than Casablanca, but Casablanca kind of isn't quite film noir, and so that's why I flipped them like that. There's Peter Lorre with his curly hair and so on, and there's a scene that I've linked to when he comes in to see the detective and his business card is scented, and the Bogart character, Sam Spade, what a great name, Sam Spade, says, he sort of raises his eyebrow, but that is sort of the signal that he's playing a gay man. Peter Lorre is playing a gay man. He's very neat and very fastidious, and he's got this wonderfully curlied hair, and he's got a scented business card, and that's about all they had to say. They didn't have to say a whole lot more, right? The people would know, people in the audience would know that he is that sort of shorthand for a gay man. And we have Sidney Greenstreet here again. We saw Sidney Greenstreet also before all three of these guys. And remember, they're all under contract at Warner Brothers. So Warner Brothers, it's like that's the team, right? We've got our quarterbacks and our whatever, blockers and kickers and all that. That's the team that we put out on the field. And if we're going to make a film noir, then we bring out our film noir team. Peter Lorre and Sidney Greenstreet, I think they made like 6 or 7 movies together, but they were never the leads. They were always the character actors, adding all that wonderful spice to the film. Humphrey Bogart is playing Sam Spade, and this is from a book by Dashiell Hammett, and we know Dashiell Hammett already because we have talked about The Thin Man with Nick and Nora Charles and all their wonderful drinking and so on. So Humphrey Bogart is going to play 2 classic detectives, Sam Spade, and the next film that we're going to talk about, or the film after the next film, is called The Big Sleep, and he's going to play another classic detective called Philip Marlowe, written by Raymond Chandler. So he gets to play really the key detective heroes from books written in the 20s and 30s and 40s. And there they are, Peter Lorre and Sidney Greenstreet with Bogart. This is such a wonderful film, but don't try to follow the plot too much. Listen to the dialogue, watch the acting, enjoy the movie. It is so complicated. A couple of these movies are very complicated. The Big Sleep's very complicated too. I don't know how many times I ended up watching these movies before I sort of figured out who did this and who did that and everything. So don't worry. I'm not going to ask who done it or how done it on any tests or anything like that. But the plotting is very, very dense. Let's just put it that way. And I've linked to a wonderful scene where these 2 characters and the femme fatale, played by Mary Astor, and another character, Elisha Cook Jr., are all in the room, and they are trying to get their hands on the Maltese Falcon. And Malta is an island in the Mediterranean, and there is a prologue, a credit crawl, kind of like Star Wars at the very beginning of the film, talking about the Knights Templar and their battles and so on in the Middle East, and having a jewel-encrusted falcon with diamonds and rubies and jewels and all that kind of stuff. This would be going on during the Crusades, 1100, 1200, something like that, during the Crusades in the Middle East. And so there's this rumored bird, right, the falcon, and these guys and the girl and lots of other people, they're kind of what you might call fortune hunters, and they're traveling the world. I don't know where they get their money, but they're traveling the world, paying people off, bumping people off, doing whatever it takes to get their hands on this fortune. That's it, really. That's the plot, right? Everybody's trying to get the Maltese Falcon, and is the Falcon in the movie the real thing or not? And how many people have to die in order for somebody to get their hands on the Falcon or not? And so in the room, we see them all ready to stab each other in the back, right? Who do I have to turn into the cops in order to get them out of my way so that I can get so that I can get the Falcon. And it's wonderful just to watch them, not literally stabbing each other in the back, but sort of metaphorically, ready to give any one of them up to the authorities if that allows them to get a little bit closer to owning the bird. All right, we're actually going to leave Hollywood and go overseas for The Third Man. This is a British film, and it was shot on location, very rare, in post-war Vienna, Austria. Quite unusual for the time, and it really adds a lot. It's hard to build a set really like this. I mean, Hollywood was pretty good, and they had wonderful sets and cobblestone streets and all that kind of stuff, but when we see the bombed out actual Vienna, Austria, with all the rubble and all the whole rest of it, it really brings it alive. It's really something to see. Actual location. It's very clear that Casablanca was done at Warner Brothers, at Burbank. We don't see lots of wide shots or establishing or anything like that. It's a very interior film, and Maltese Falcon is too. But The Third Man, it kind of is opened up to the world there and the actual Vienna, Austria. And like I say, 1949, Hollywood was starting to get out and make movies outside of Hollywood. Cameras were a little smaller. This is a British film, and they went out to shoot also. But America was American film industry doing the same thing, getting out, shooting on location, and Britain too. It's known for its atmospheric location cinematography. It's just such a beautiful movie. Really, one of the very best movies that we're going to see in this class. I would put it right up there with Grapes of Wrath. Gorgeous film. These tilted angles are called Dutch angles in the industry, and that's kind of funny because these German cinematographers that came to America for various reasons would sort of start doing these kinds of shots like that. And German, the word for German in German is Deutsch, right? Deutschland. So that sort of got misnamed Dutch angles instead of Deutsch angles, but that's what that is. And the whole idea is to show this radical instability, right? It's not a level world. It's tilted. We might not even notice that the camera is tilted like this, but as we watch the film, we just feel a little uneasy, a little off-put. And so Carol Reed, it's a man, by the way, Sir Carol Reed. He does it all throughout the movie. Matter of fact, one of his friends, I think for a birthday or Christmas present, gave him a level so that he could have his shots all nice and leveled and everything. But it's really wonderful to see these shots like this through the movie. Also, the streets are always wet. We never see it rain, but the streets are always wet. And that's because wet streets photograph so much nicer. Even if you see a movie today and it's set in Las Vegas, the streets are going to be wet because there's all that neon and everything in Las Vegas, and it looks so cool reflecting in the wet streets. So television shows, they have a water truck, they drive up and down the street, and then they shoot. It's practically standard operating procedure, and they do that in this film too. Just a little side note, I guess, but boy, does it sure looks nice, scene after scene. And we'll see wet streets, and then we'll cut to another shot, and we'll see dry, dusty bricks and things like that. So we get a Leitmotiv, which is a recurring theme. In this case, it's music, and we are down in an underground sewer at this point, and all that wonderful reflections and everything. And that is Harry's theme, and it is played on a zither. Yep, on a zither. Wonderful stringed instrument from possibly Turkey or Greece or somewhere in the Mediterranean there, and it's beautiful. And every time we see Harry Lime, played by Orson Welles, in the movie, we're going to hear his music. He's going to have accompanying music, and it's kind of a cool thing to have music and a character. Star Wars, every time Darth Vader appeared on screen, we'd hear the Darth Vader music, dun 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 dun, dun, right? And that's the Imperial March theme. So Luke had his own music, and Lawrence of Arabia, and lots of movies. Gone with the Wind had Tara's theme, right? So a lot of movies have a leitmotif, kind of a new term for us all. And let me see, we've got rationing. That's part of all this. We are in post-war Europe, and gas and rubber and things like that, sugar, flour, all those things would be rationed during the war. And in America, you get a ration card, and you go to the store, and you get what you needed, and they punch your card because each family could only get so much. Tires for cars, right? You probably have to patch up your tires. They needed rubber for the Jeeps and things like that, and airplanes. So there's rationing. That's all going to be part of this film here, because along with rationing, we get the black market. And sure, I know where I can get some sugar. I know where I can get some cigarettes. Okay, but here in the black market, it's not luxury items like chocolates and wristwatches and cigarettes and things, but penicillin. And the people at the hospital, they need penicillin, and Harry is dealing in black market penicillin, and this black market penicillin is fake penicillin, and people are dying. So Harry is a bad guy. He's very charming and all of that, but he is just out for himself. He's out to make a buck, and his poor friend has been told, come to Austria, come to Vienna, I have work for you. And when Holly Martins gets to Vienna, there's a funeral, and the funeral is for Harry Lime, the Orson Welles character. But as we are going to find out later in the movie, that wasn't Harry's body. There was a third man who was there, and he's going to be sort of trying to track down where is Harry and all of that. He's going to meet Harry's girlfriend. He's going to start falling in love with Harry's girlfriend, and complicated stuff with black market penicillin and all of that. And there is a wonderful chase right there at the climax of the film through the underground sewers. That's partly how Harry seems to appear and disappear, almost like a magician. Okay, he is going underground, right? Right when the police think they have him, he disappears. Well, he's figured out his way around the sewers and mapped out. You can see they're quite large, and they have tracked Harry down to the sewers, and there's a big manhunt out to try to get Harry. And boy, what a wonderful chase, and quite famous. And I don't know if today, but they have tours of the sewers in Vienna. Mostly, it's water and things like channels and things like that, like that. It's not really a lot of open sewage or anything like that. And in the movie, there are rats that you see, and they don't shoot some of the stuff they built on sound stages and stuff like that. But when they're actually down in the sewers, there are real rats sort of skittering about just at the bottom of the shot. And it's really quite interesting to see that sort of thing. It's very realistic, real rubble, real bombed out cities, real rats, all that stuff. And gorgeous movie to look at, wonderful lighting. Enjoy The Third Man before we get back to Bogart again. The Big Sleep, 1946. Notice all these movies are right after the war. In part 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, through into the 1950s. He is playing Detective Philip Marlowe in this case. This is directed by Howard Hawks. We've talked about Howard Hawks with Scarface and Bringing Up Baby. And they had trouble with the Hayes office. There is implied, remember they don't come out and say this stuff, but there's implied porn, nudity, homosexuality, all that kind of stuff is running through. Of course, they could say it a little bit more plainly in the book. Books didn't quite have the censorship, I think because movies and later television and of course radio, it's for a wider audience even than books. I don't know exactly why the courts allowed books to get away and theater to get away with more than movies, but anyway, this movie also had trouble with the Hays Office, just like Casablanca and some other films. And there are women literally throwing themselves at Bogart in the movie, and I've linked to some of these scenes. They're really kind of fun. Martha Vickers in the opening scene, wonderful opening scene. She comes out very beautiful and leggy. She's wearing little shorty shorts and everything, and literally falls into Bogart's arms. He's come to visit her father. And later, Bogart is going to meet her sister, and they have already been together. That's Bogart and Lauren Bacall, and they met on a previous film and fell in love. After the movie was over, fell in love. They had maybe a 25-year age difference, but it really, she wasn't after his money or anything like that, or his fame. It was a truly loving marriage. They stayed together for 15 or 20 years or so until Bogart, yes, lung cancer. Okay, we see him smoking a lot, on set and off set. So they were on-screen and off-screen lovers, and I've also linked to Have and Have Not, and another wonderful scene of their wonderful witty banter. They actually, after they became a couple, the writers of the movie and the director, they wrote an extra scene or two for them because they had such chemistry together. And there's also another wonderful scene in a library, in a bookstore, sorry, not a library, in a bookstore with another actress. Bogart goes into the bookstore to get in out of the rain. He's trying to do some detective work, and he's going to meet another beautiful young lady, and a wonderful trope. She's going to take off her glasses and take the pins out of her hair and be beautiful. Yes. So that's a wonderful trope, right? Just take off your glasses and let your hair down and all that. And they're going to have some rye, and they're going to pull the shades down, and then it's going to go to black. You know, we kind of know what's going to happen. We kind of don't. They weren't real obvious about this kind of stuff. They're not going to show him tucking in his shirt or zipping up his pants or anything really obvious and gross like that. But that's, you know, that's kind of the thing that they would do. The man and the woman together, shades are drawn, and then dip to black. So, like I say, some wonderful stuff. And we're going to see then a very short scene from To Have and Have Not, and it's a real classic scene. You know how to whistle, don't you, Steve? And so I've linked to that. That would be the last scene. And then, like I said, it has the same basic plot as the Coen Brothers' The Big Lebowski, of all things. So the Coen Brothers have kind of worked their way. They love movies, and they are up on their history. And so we've talked already about Hail Caesar, and we've talked already about Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, right? Those are Coen Brother movies. And this one, The Big Lebowski, this guy is a total slacker, the dude, but he's going to get entangled with a rich man who also has some blackmailing going on in the Big Sleep. The colonel's daughters are being blackmailed by, I don't know, pornographers or something like that, gamblers, and the Bogart character is going to need to sort of untangle the mess. And in this movie, The Big Lebowski, his beautiful trophy wife is being blackmailed. So kind of the same plot. It's kind of funny because this one is a hilarious movie. but it really has this film noir plot. So you can watch this movie for extra credit, of course. If you like the Coen Brothers, there's a couple of movies you can watch for extra credit and enjoy all of that. Interestingly, a lot of film noir on YouTube is free. A lot of it has fallen through the cracks. I wish The Big Sleep or The Have and Have Not or The Third Man was there on YouTube. We have some movies that are the whole entire movie is there on YouTube. Nosferatu. There's a whole bunch of movies. Metropolis. I'm not sure how they slipped through the cracks, but there are lots of great older movies that you can watch the whole thing for free on YouTube. And there are lots of noir films there on YouTube. You don't have to pay a dime. A lot of them are B movies and things, but there's some real gems in there. So if you decide that you like film noir, you can check out a lot of stuff on YouTube. Also a lot of sci-fi too. If you're into sci-fi from the 1950s, you can check that out. You don't have to spend a dime on any of that. And so that brings us up to the end of film noir, class 13. We have our last class, which is kind of an overview. It's the last time we will be looking at movie stars and moguls, and it is on the 1940s, and they are, it's mostly going to be kind of a review. It won't be a real long class, but they're going to talk about Bogart, they're going to talk about film noir, and they're going to talk about some of the other things that we've been talking about in class, and it will act as a pretty good. There's some new material. You still need to watch it. There's some new material on the very last episode of Movie Stars and Moguls, but for the most part, it's going to act as a nice recap and refresher, and so you'll watch that before taking the third and final test. So, until then, Professor Dave Eccles signing off. Until next time.